For these next 2 weeks, I'm gonna try to find like a good, decent cutoff spot for today. Because these next 2 weeks we're gonna go into the rules of digestion, and I'm not gonna give you guys like a meal plan or tell you what to eat or tell you when to eat or anything like that. Um, the concepts are to just be able to work with how the digestive system process actually happens. So you can take that information and then plug and play into your life according to how you are living and change wherever it is that change needs to occur. Um, so don't think we're going to get into, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to be like, this is a keto, or, we're not going to go into any of that stuff. Um, before, so because it's a longer slideshow, it's probably like 50, 60 slides. I'm going to try to find a good cutoff point today. But I apologize if we pause in kind of like a weird intermediate, because once we get into the actual digestive process, there's a lot of information, but it's beautiful information. But what I want to start with today, why, there we go. I want to start with polyvagal theory. Um, but before we start with polyvagal theory, I want you guys to grab a pen and paper if you have one, and just write down this question and write a quick answer to it. What do your meal times look like? And maybe that's different for every meal, but just kind of take a little mental snapshot on your pen and paper of like, what does my breakfast look like? What does my lunch look like? What does my dinner look like? If I have, you know, different times eating, right? Snacks. When do I eat? What am I doing while I'm eating? Who am I with? Do I even notice that I'm eating? Katie, if you are you guys good? Do you need more time or okay, cool. Um, So just a couple quotes, and I believe I have the website in the comments. So when I download the PDF file of these, you'll be able to click the link. But polyvagal really, we were talking about the nervous system last week, kind of the rough plug and play, even week one of right. We look at this system turning on, this system turning off. Last week, we really opened up that nervous system to, at least from the autonomic to be parasympathetic, sympathetic, excuse me, and the enteric nervous system. So really dropping into the gut as well. And so polyvagal theory is going to really just be a reconceptualization of how we understand the parasympathetic nervous system. But you'll see how this ties into digestion because it is in this state that our body is actually able to receive and digest food. In any other state, it is not. So I want to dive into this a little bit, and then we'll drop into those rules. So when we look at polyvagal theory, there's going to be three core components. You're going to see this hierarchical organization as far as circuitry, neuroception, and co-regulation. Just something to hold in mind. This theory is not necessarily going to describe separate systems, excuse me, but how this entire parasympathetic process is a single integrated process, how this autonomic regulation is structured, guided, supported within social context. Because again, even the parasympathetic, we're taught to look at it as rest and digest, when polyvagal is actually going to invite us to look at it as social and safe. And so when we really just kind of again begin to look at how the autonomic nervous system is organized and responds to, various environmental aspects, we can just start to, through this lens, see a difference in how we evaluate safety and threat, how regulation is maintained, and how relationships then are ultimately carried out, even our relationship with food. So, as far as the hierarchical systems, these are not necessarily going to always be independent. Sometimes they may move back and forth depending on the context of where you are. But rather than just those two states of sympathetic and parasympathetic, they propose a third response pathway that is the ventral vagal, which is safe and social. So you have your ventral vagal at the top, you have your sympathetic in the middle, and you have your dorsal vagal shutdown at the bottom. Again, these are going to be dependent on the perceived safety and available energy in the body, as well as what is being taken in from the environment. So, again, it's not necessarily just like a single one, but sometimes, depending on the context of something, you might find yourself moving through these at various points of that entire experience. And so, just a photo kind of highlighting this, and you can see where the nerves start and kind of where they end, right? That sympathetic is going to be fight, flight, and freeze. Freeze and withdrawal are different. So consider freeze when you have like the buildup of energy in the body, right? But you have that like weighted blanket on. So once the threat is over, your body can move and activate that energy to do what it needs to do. The withdrawal collapse is the isolation on a very, I would say more, I'm trying to say it without being graphic, but like if your body is systematically shutting down because of an accident or intense loss of blood, right? You're going to see this withdrawn collapse internally because the body's going to take blood away from systems to conserve it so that it doesn't burn it up. You can also see this in emotional states like sadness, grief, loss, right? Certain energy systems are going to not be to the same caliber as if a certain experience didn't happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's life threatening. So depression, the withdrawal, the collapse, you can look at uh, all of those kind of in the same realm. But then we have this relating friend, right? Which I find very interesting because it goes from our eyes, that's technically part of our esophagus, but then it goes into our heart space as well, right? So, how do we feel ourselves being in relationship? And this is something that Bethany talked about in week 4 last week for office hours when we look at even our exteroception, right? And the ability to just have the body sense what that environment is and if it's safe or not, that's going to be part of this process. Just that subtle energy safety. There's another one that we'll talk about, which is I'm blanking on the word. It'll come to me when I come to the next slide. So again, just referencing this, as I said, is like that safe social mode. This response is going to be characterized by feelings of calm, joy, connection, safety. This is where we're going to be able to have social engagement where digestion and physiological regulation is going to occur. You're going to even notice curiosity and compassion in this state. When we're in that fight, flight, or freeze, as well as the dorsal withdrawal, digestion is not one of the things that is going to receive the proper blood flow for that process to happen. So when we're in certain emotional states or when we're in certain environments or when we're under stress, right? The body is not actually in a place to digest food. So it no longer becomes about like, am I eating an apple or am I having a cheeseburger? The question is your body able to actually receive that at all? So even taking into consideration that relating aspect, right? We'll do an activity when we get to the first phase of digestion. What does your mealtime look like, right? Are you actually in relationship with your food? Can you actually feel and sense and note what you're eating and taking in. Is your body ready to receive that? Or are we eating while we're engaged in other things that even in that engagement in other activities may put us in emotional responses or physiological states where the body is actually not intended to take in food? For instance, you're watching a horror movie or, some type of like crime show on Netflix, right? If you feel that cortisol and that adrenaline start to kick, your digestion, if you're sitting down to watch a movie while you have dinner, right, your body's actually not in a state to digest. So it's not again about what am I eating? The question instead is this the appropriate time? Um, I have just this down here at the bottom. It's not necessarily in relationship to digestion, but even just consider your physiology when you're engaging in things like journaling or Socratic questioning or whatever it is you're doing, right, as far as self-reflective work. If you're in a state of curiosity and compassion, if you're able to engage in true relationship and you feel safe and social, you're going to be able to access a level of curiosity about yourself. You're going to be able to ask yourself a level of questioning that wouldn't be available if instead, right, in those activities, you're believing everything that you're writing down, or you're taking it for face value, or you're getting upset about something in that process, right? Maybe there's a way that, that emotion moves in a second or two, right? And it's an invitation to see a lesson or a belief system or a story that you have on repeat. But, sometimes I caution people even in some of those activities, like be cognizant, right? When you're doing that self-reflective work, even of what state you find yourself in, because the second that curiosity and compassion goes out the window, now we just start to engage in the same thought processes that we're attempting to change. So just a little note there for that process. Um, so again, just going back to that question, what do your meal times look like? Um, I'm curious, yeah, if either one of you want to share what you wrote down. If not, no pressure at all. But
Yeah, this has been kind of a pressure point for me lately because I've been recognizing that my meal times are usually rushed or like super late. Like we've been eating dinner, at like 6 or 7 at night, which is and then going to bed like right after kind of thing. So it's just, yeah, we're in the awareness stage right now. But yeah, it's definitely a hot spot for us right now.
yeah, I mean, at least being in the awareness stage and seeing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, I really have always looked at food as just kind of like fuel. Um, and I think something that I've been realizing lately is there is benefit to kind of the ritual of having a meal,
Mhm.
and kind of utilizing that as a time to spend. It could be self-reflecting, it could be spending time with family. And so I've been trying to push that a little bit more, at least with dinner. Let's sit down at the table, let's converse, let's talk about our day, and kind of go through that. But
Mhm.
definitely breakfast. Honestly, I probably skip breakfast most of the time. I fast, and I have lunch. Usually it's like a salad. I try to keep things pretty low carb. And it's much harder, like in that time, I'm working usually. So it's just very much like just get through the 15 minutes of eating so that you can keep going.
Hop on to the next
Um,
thing. Yep.
exactly. So that's for me, that's what it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of this stuff, I think even just, and I appreciate both of your guys' shares again, it's so common with just how we're taught to live the day, right? Like the 9 to 5 or the kids' activities after work, or you know what I mean? Like, oh, that meeting is right in the middle of lunch. Like the schedule of work it doesn't have to, but we're taught that it takes priority over all of these things. And um yeah, it's always a very interesting experience when you start to see these things and then where those, you know, I'm going to say limits come in, because it's not even a limit with another person. It's just that limit with yourself, right? Of like, okay, how does it look like for me to take those 30 minutes to literally maybe sit outside or, not be in front of a screen or, you know what I mean? Like really feel that engagement and connection with food. And like I said, when we get to the first phase of eating, we'll do a little thing and you'll literally see your body's response to like, am I ready to eat or not? And it's just it's such an interesting experience to put into play on a day to day because ultimately, right, everything that people want to build, that confidence, trust, overall health, it's like it starts with listening, right? But if we're not taught these things about how to listen, then we think we need certain things, or you know what I mean? Like there's just not that like, oh, that does that. So even all of this has been very, very informative for me too as I go through all the little rabbit holes. It's wonderful. Um, going back to, oh, I apologize. Let me put this on airplane mode. Um, just going back to that ventral vagal pathway. There is a defensive activation system that is called the vagal brake. And so when there is some type of output needed, that ventral vagal can be reduced or withdrawn, and then that constraint can be lifted. So there is a process within the body to naturally move back and forth between these states, which is why I mentioned at the beginning, right? It's not necessarily like a turning on of something or a turning off of something, because even something just as simple as, holding your food for 30 seconds before you eat may activate what you need to move into ventral, right? It may, just feeling in relationship with your food, giving gratitude to, you know, who grew it, how it got to you, who made it, who did what in the process, right? So when we have those moments, like you were speaking to Jared, of like rituals and how we can really begin to be intentional with the relationship of our food, that digestion process changes entirely, which then ultimately has the ability to change all of the gut pieces that we talked about last week too, which we'll highlight just a little bit as refresher here. Sympathetic state. So again, just going back to that, those three pieces within polyvagal. Sympathetic is what we've traditionally been taught. Danger and conditions of danger, excuse me, this is going to support mobilization, so that fight, flight, or freeze. Again, blood flow is diverted from the digestive system to support muscles that will move you from the threat, basically, if we're going to fight it or run away from it, or freeze until it's gone and then engage. And then this dorsal is going to be where your life is threatened or there is a belief in some way that there is unsafety, right? Again, a loss, uncertainty of what to do in a situation. This is again just going to reflect that strategy of metabolic conservation and reducing energy expenditure. I mentioned before, but mentioning again, right? Sadness, grief, loss, apathy. If you were to even just kind of bring into awareness, right, what your mealtime looks like when you're happy versus maybe when you're stressed or worried about something, right? Or thinking about someone who has lost someone significant, right? And everyone's like, please eat. And they're like, I don't want to. Right. It's not even just a thought of I don't want to. It's literally their body conserving energy and being in states where the body may not literally want to eat because it doesn't need to. Right. So when people ask, just grief cycle and things like that, there is no right or wrong because the body is literally doing whatever process it innately knows how to do in order again to conserve, reduce energy until that threat is resolved in some way. Um, I have this question here. How do you think emotional states impact how food is digested? I know we've kind of chatted about that. But take a moment, and I'm just kind of thinking to like my childhood. And so this may look different for other people. Actually, it probably will entirely look different for other people. But I'm curious what your meal times looked like growing up and or what your thoughts or stories are as you eat. So if you were to just kind of take a moment and like ponder, right? Like mealtime look like growing up? I know for me, when I grew up part of the time with my grandparents, my mom was there, but when I was really young, and I remember, big family holidays, they'd start cooking at like 6, 7 a.m., but there was so much yelling in the kitchen. Even when we sat down to eat, people are yelling at each other, and it's just like 30 people in a room and, just literal craziness, and you're eating. And I remember thinking at times, like, if I just eat fast enough, I get out of here faster. Right. And so even just that thought is going to have an impact on, and this is where, uh, the messages in water and those types of experiences come in, right? How is that thought feeding the water in my body? How is that shifting my blood chemistry? What is that doing to my stress response cycle? Am I even in a ability or state to process food, right? How then is my water changing based on my thoughts to support or not support all the functions and glands and organs that are supporting this process as a whole? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was, of course, that book has been very apparent on my mind. But yeah, I was kind of like applying that same principle of like how he did all the studies of, writing words and placing them on the water bottles and having the water listen to music and all that kind of stuff, or, listen to the vibrations of the music. Um, like food and plants and all of that have that same ability. So it's kind of like, if you, yeah, if you are gonna, be in a negative um emotional state, or there's yelling and screaming as you're like preparing the food or whatever, that food is going to take on that vibration and that frequency.
Mm-hmm.
um
Yep.
yeah, I think it doesn't just apply to water.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know this information, but obviously plants hold a significant amount of water, right? Food does,
Right.
animals do. So same rules, same concepts, I would say apply.
Yeah.
But definitely, yeah, the emotion and how you cook, that completely gets infused with the food, right? Again, where we're in relationship, but there's so many things that we energetically aren't taught about being in relationship that we don't recognize that we're actually in relationship when it's
Right.
happening.
Right.
What were you gonna say, Jared?
Yeah, I was going to say what this kind of brings to mind for me um, is, what we tell ourselves
Hmm.
and how much of an impact that has on how we feel about things, and in my opinion, even how your body functions,
Hmm.
right, metabolically. So, I try to eat a healthy diet, but as everybody, um, sometimes we eat things that aren't so healthy. Um, and I feel like you can feel physically and definitely mentally the difference when you you're okay with that decision or when you're
Hmm.
not okay with that decision. The guilt sets in. I feel like you gain more weight, you gain more fat probably, if you tell yourself this is terrible for me, I shouldn't be eating this. As opposed to, if you maybe didn't do that to yourself, your body would just kind of process it as normal. So that's what it kind of brings, mind when we talk about the emotional state.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that because after this series, I want to go into like a specific 4-week series about our belief system and how it impacts our blood. Because I was watching a doctor the other day, and I forget the language of exactly what she posted, but she said, be conscious of the story that you're telling yourself because the person that is no longer involved in your life or doing the thing with you is still getting under your skin, which means it's still impacting your blood chemistry. So, what do you need to see in the story that you're telling yourself so that you can take action in the different direction, right? If it's, I can't do this, I'm not good enough, what do you need to see in the learning of that experience so that you can accurately take action to do something to prove the opposite of that belief system? But one of the things that she mentioned, and I might have shared this at other points, there was a research study, and I might have put this in the Telegram group, but there was a research study. They took two different groups of rabbits, fed them diets that were very well known to cause, I forget the name of the disorder, but basically like um, artery clottage and, you know, inflicting heart disease, that kind of stuff. One group, they said the kindest, most nourishing, they loved on them for like the first half hour before they fed them that food. The other group, they didn't. And the group that they had the positive interactions with before actually had like 60% less impact by that food. And you see this even in studies with psychiatric medication. It's like the nocebo versus placebo effect, where again, I forget where the study was done, but they had various groups. All one group was on antidepressants. Well, the entire, study of participants was on antidepressants. There, I think, were two or four groups as far as how they shifted it, but they basically told everybody, we may take you off your meds, we may not. And there was a group that they actually did take their medication off. There was a group that they kept on their medication. The group that believed that they were still on their medication and it was helping, but they were off of it, had better symptom improvement than those that were still on their medication, but believed they came off of it and it was going to have a negative effect on them. So it
Not surprised.
just to, further your point, what we tell ourselves. And again, this is where then you can use that if you need to cheat the rules, you do it intelligently, right? I mean, I know we all have, various days and lives, and I know for me, like I try to cook at home and do all the things, but I know when, family comes into town, it's like, oh, we're going to that place, and I can bring my own food, or I can use these laws very intelligently to enjoy a meal somewhere that, is what it is. Or if you're traveling and find yourself in certain situations, right, where maybe something's not available that you would normally have available. So when you start to kind of see those, right, ways in which change can still occur and you can still work with the rules but intelligently break them, it doesn't mean that, you're doing something every single day that's going to contribute to a negative impact of the body, right? But when you can see those aspects of, again, how to break the rules intelligently, it's such a different and way more, I would say, freeing experience that you have.
Agree completely.
Yeah. Neuroception. That was the word I was looking for earlier. I was like, what's that word that Bethany was talking about? Um, so neuroception is the nervous system's unconscious scanning for safety or danger. It's going to evaluate facial expressions, tone of voice, body posture, environment, internal sensations, memory. So even the internal sensations, right, are going to be things like what physiological state are you in as far as your nervous system? What is your blood sugar situation? How much did you sleep? Mitochondrial function, excuse me, all of those various aspects. So if, you are in a safe environment and you're able to socialize, but let's say you didn't get the proper sleep the night before, or you haven't eaten for the day, or there's something internally going on, right? An emotion, a story, etc. Your neuroception is also going to pick up on that as well. So again, just a subconscious process that integrates information from the environment, that exteroception piece, right? What are we bringing in? The body's internal state, which is that interoception, to direct the autonomic responses of the autonomic nervous system. And again, there's probably like a 25 or 30-minute conversation with Bethany on the seven sections. And she's I mean, every time I listen to this woman talk, I've known her for a few years. It's one of those brain melting moments where I'm like, wow. But if you have any questions, you are absolutely welcome to reach out to her. She's a wealth of knowledge and is always happy to speak on those things. I just put this from Google as far as neuroception and just some of the other aspects. We've kind of already talked about it, right? But again, that internal monitoring of seeing, changes in heart rate, breathing, chemical signals, Any, drop in blood pressure, heart irregulations, hormonal activities, those may potentially move someone into that dorsal, right? So again, this neuroception is going to be part of the factor in the body determining which of those three states from that polyvagal aspect come into play. Yeah. Yaz spoke about, well, she asked me about serotonin last week. So I know I kind of mentioned, right, like this first part may feel a little choppy, but it will all tie in as we end next week. And I believe her question was, how is serotonin made, or what activities promote serotonin, right? We hear about oxytocin as like that spending time with loved ones, intimate engagement, even like, you know, petting an animal. We know dopamine is that. Um, Engaging in something that is going to give you a long-term reward, right? There are also things that, can give us spikes in dopamine that are short-term, like, how many likes are on your Instagram and things like that. But I didn't have an answer to her question. And as I dove in, I found it very fascinating because we know that 90 to 95% of serotonin is made in the gut, but the way that it's actually made through the gut is through our food choices. And so, again, I'm not going to tell you guys what to eat or when to eat or, any of those pieces. Is not a diet. But when we look into some of the serotonin aspects, it becomes very interesting to see how certain things can be digested together to help promote more serotonin. So serotonin is, and again, no pop quiz on any of these pieces, but it's produced in a two-step chemical process, primarily within the GI tract. Again, 1 to 2% come into the brain, but it's a process that starts with tryptophan. And you've probably heard about tryptophan being in like turkey on Thanksgiving, right? Things of that nature. It's what makes you really tired. Well, if it's used and broken down properly, it's actually going to convert into serotonin. Um, and so again, it's an essential amino acid. The body does not produce it. It has to come through your diet. So it again plays a role in serotonin. It also plays a role in melatonin, which is going to be that factor that helps you sleep at night and really supports circadian rhythm, especially if you're using the sun, right? That morning sunlight is actually going to signal to the body to stop making melatonin, move more into the metabolic activation awake that occurs during the day. Watching that sun go down, being in that darkness is actually going to signal those systems to stop and that melatonin to start so that any repair cell apoptosis that needs to occur at night can actually happen. But your body can't make serotonin without tryptophan. And so if we're not eating right in ways that are going to allow protein and other essential vitamins and minerals to come in that have the ability to then process into tryptophan, we're not going to get as much serotonin. So again, this is just, I guess, a list of food. Again, I'm not going to tell you what to eat, when to eat, how to eat, any of those pieces. But these are just some animal-based sources that are high in tryptophan. So we see, pretty much any poultry, animal, meat, lamb, beef, salmon, dairy, eggs, all of those aspects. We'll get to this later at the end as far as like why food choices are important. But the thing I just want to say in regards to this is just be conscious of where you're getting these things from. Because there are a lot of corporations that have monopolized on certain aspects. Like I think there's two companies that distribute like 90% of the eggs in America. Um, and so then you want to ask, like, how are those chickens cared for, right? What is the quality of their environments? Whatever it is they take in their environment goes into their physiology. We then eat. So same thing with all those other animals too. But then we also have plant-based sources, so seeds, nuts, soy, beans, chickpeas, vegetables, 70% dark chocolate. Um, I want to speak to all of the things coming together though, because again, it's not just going to be changing your diet that's going to change, right? I mean, it will play a role, but it's a factor, right? All the inputs together create the experience. So what I was speaking to earlier about sunlight and that exposure, right? That's going to help with serotonin. Um, Afternoon sunlight supports vitamin D and immunity, which are going to also be gut microbiome aspects. And because 90 to 95% of serotonin is made in the gut, right? We want to make sure that that gut microbiome is the healthiest that it can be. Excuse me, exercise is going to increase serotonin levels. Again, going to the gym or going for a single 30-minute walk a day, but staying sedentary for the rest is not going to be what the body requires in order to have these higher levels of serotonin. Ideally, you want to be getting up every 30 to 60 minutes, even if it's for just, 2 to 5 minutes. Um, I found this really interesting, even with just 30-minute exercise routine. If you're sitting for most of the day or you're being sedentary for most of the day, you're going to see those blood sugar spikes. You're going to see lower cardiovascular health with those blood sugar spikes again. If we go back to week one with HPA, right, you're going to see that cortisol and all of those stress response cycles. So there's so many different ways that all of these inputs come together to create the experience, and we can't control for all of them, and it's going to look different on a day-to-day basis. But again, when you recognize kind of like the ease and simplicity, right, rather than needing to buy something, most of the stuff that you need is actually just right there available to you. And the simplicity of taking something away versus adding something is typically way more powerful because it's actually going to make space for more of these things to happen. Um, Again, healthy gut microbiome, we already mentioned that is going to influence that tryptophan to serotonin conversion process. And we've talked about mood, I mentioned, or in thoughts, I mentioned that rabbit study earlier. Any stress management, right? So, and I don't even want to say stress management, but activities that are going to support the ability for your body to move out of stressful situations, right? The ability for it to develop a capacity, inner fortitude, right? Those, when we use our muscles and we actually move our body, the stronger our body is, the more our mental fortitude is there. So even practices, yoga, breath work, meditation, even gratitude, right, is going to be paramount because again, there are ways in which we see through things, the lens as far as belief systems. One of the things Bethany mentioned too, as far as deceptions, she was talking about like all the variety of inputs. They move through a filtering process of how we perceive ourselves, other, and the world, and that creates the output. And so we want to be conscious even of like the beliefs and the story that you tell yourself, because whether you're actually eating and do this just for fun when you're on your own, it's different when you're with family, but maybe you can also do this with family. But if you're eating on your own, just notice what you're thinking about. Notice what energy and mood, even if you're not in front of, doing emails at the same time, or maybe you are, right? Maybe you're outside. Notice where your mind goes to. Notice what mood you find yourself in and become aware of what that story is. Because again, the beliefs and how we talk to ourselves and what we tell ourselves about ourselves, we're digesting that. It's part of the whole experience. So if you can become an observer of that, you'll see at some point what the learning or the lesson is for you to shift, that then in shifting it is going to, or I should say taking action is going to shift the entire physiology of the brain and belief system that story's no longer gonna take place. Any questions on any of this stuff before I move forward? I know we've covered a lot so far. No? No? Cool. Okay. So we're gonna get into the rules of digestion, and we'll probably just hit the first phase or partway through the second phase. So we have 3 phases of digestion. Now there are multiple stages that occur within each one. But just as far as overview, we have the cephalic phase, the gastric phase, and the intestinal phase. The first phase, the cephalic phase, is going to occur before your food even enters your stomach. So this is going to be triggered by sight, smell, the thought of food. And the entire purpose of this phase is to release saliva and gastric juices to prepare the entire digestion process. This is the only part of digestion that we have the ability to do consciously. So when we take in substances, whether that's food, liquid, medication, all of that, the actual digestive process itself is called ingestion. But when we can do that consciously and with intention, we get a very different experience than if we do that unconsciously. Um, you can think about something that you've eaten recently, or if you have access to your kitchen and want to go get something like a fruit or just something. I want you guys to have an experience where you're holding something of like food either in your mind or in your hand. Um, and just notice what signals your body sends you, right? Maybe even doing that with your drink or as I hold this, I'm like, I want water. And that's my mantra for the morning. Um, so yeah, just for, 30 seconds, think of something that you've eaten recently or, you're gonna eat later and just notice what the body tells you. Do either of you wanna share?
Um, I was holding my glass of, I think I did throat coat tea this morning because allergies have been real up here, but um, it's funny because I'm a big tea drinker throughout the day, and I often will find myself like really thirsty for water at the end of the day because I haven't had enough of just like the plain water. And so that immediately was what I started thinking of when I started smelling my tea. It was like, nope, I've taken one sip of water today. Like I gotta get some water going. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yep. It's amazing just how that, right, 10, 15, 20 seconds is enough to just kind of give you oh, I'm sensing that.
a little reminder. Yeah.
Mhm.
Because
Yep.
yeah, if this wasn't happening, I would not have drinking my water. I would not have taken a drink. So
Go ahead.
I was holding my large cup of coffee here, and I was thinking I probably drink too much coffee. I drink too much caffeine. So that's what was coming through my mind. I did eat breakfast this morning. I had some egg bites, um, and as I was thinking about them, I was thinking um, egg bites and coffee, maybe not the best breakfast. And yeah,
That's okay. What did you notice physiologically when you were holding the coffee and you thought like, oh, I've had a lot of caffeine? Because like even when I held this and I was like, oh, I could feel like a desire for thirst in the back of my throat. So like what did your body prompt you? I'm curious.
I felt kind of flushed, I guess.
Okay.
And that's what triggered the feeling of, oh, I probably had too much caffeine this morning.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, do either of you know the sway test?
No.
Okay. I want to do a little demonstration on this because this to me is like one of the most powerful things. I'm going to ask you guys to turn your camera off though, just so you're not in your head about people seeing you. But watch me, but stand up. So our body has this beautiful, and we talk about it all the time, but just this beautiful innate reflexive knowledge, and it can literally be our own pendulum system when we stop long enough to inquire what it is that it wants and or needs. And so you'll see this with muscle sensitivity testing, even with like chiropractor, acupuncture work, where The body will respond in certain ways, and one way will be a yes, and one way will be a no. Excuse me. Obviously, it won't speak in the way that I'm speaking right now. But if you guys were to just close the eyes down, just really feel like the bottom of your feet touching the ground, really just rooting down and just letting like the upper body just kind of like sway and move a little bit. Just kind of feel like you're that little pendulum with the eyes closed and say this out loud. Testing for yes, my name is, and then say the name that you identify with. And I just say that because if you identify with, if you're married, but you identify with your maiden name, or you know what I mean, you identify with your the name that you took on in marriage instead. Say whatever name you identify with. But if you were to say it out loud, right, for me, like my name is Megan Zuzovich. My body, and I've done this a handful of times. I know for me, when my body moves forward, it's a yes. It will be different for each person. But if you were to say out loud, checking for yes, my name is, notice and say your name, notice which way your body moves. Recenter yourself, take a couple breaths, let the sigh happen out your mouth, and then just say checking for no, my name is, and then make up a name and notice which way your body moves instead. And the beautiful thing about this, if you think about whichever direction, right, is your yes and whichever direction is your no, you can do this with everything. You can do this with food choices. You can do this with drink choices. You can do this with activities. Like the mind has this really fascinating way of telling us what it thinks it needs based on what it knows or has learned versus us listening to the body and the body telling us what it needs.
Sorry, I got really excited.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. Tell me, tell me.
I actually started doing this recently because I saw a video of a girl who um she does it with her supplements. You know
Oh,
how like
okay.
recently I've been like kind of like I was on a bunch of like natural supplements and I just like decided to stop them about a month ago because it was just like overwhelming.
Yep.
And yeah, I like shortly after that saw this video of this girl who was like, yeah, sometimes like my body does need like a little bit of extra help. So like I'll just ask like, do I need this supplement today? And like okay, I'll get usually like my body leaning towards it if I'm, wanting it or whatever. Like so yeah, that I'm glad you like reminded me about this because I was doing it for like a couple days and then I forgot about it, but I
It
love this.
it's in the same way. And I don't like to say the forward is always yes. Mine is, but I consider that to be like a plant's going to grow towards the sun, right? So the thing that it needs, it's going to move towards. Same thing with the
Yeah.
body. The thing that it needs, it's going to say yes to. And the thing that it does not want, it's going to push away from.
Yeah. So cool.
You want to share, Jared?
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting experience.
Did I scare you?
It's just, yeah, I definitely was swaying forward on the things that were true. Asking very simple questions that I know the answer to.
Yep.
So interesting. Thinking about using that for things you don't know the answer to. Um, so it was cool. Thank you for showing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's a fun little test. Yeah, that there was it's probably back in like 2019. Um, I had my first panic attack in 2018, and it ended up being due to it literally was because of my diet, and just my lifestyle. And I worked with I call her my witch doctor. She's neither a witch nor a doctor. But she does food sensitivity testing, and we were in person doing it. And I remember that's how she tested, or she taught me at least to test outside of session. And I remember one of the vials she gave me, she put it in my hand, and they're just like, literally like the size of a penny. She put it in my hand and I wanted to vomit. Like I felt the most sick to my stomach that I had ever felt before. And I was like, I just wanted to drop it. I was like, I don't know what this is, but you need to get this away from me. And she's like, it's gluten. And I was like, oh, well, we know we're going to be taking that out. Thank you very much. But it was so eye-opening to have that experience and then just be, because that was really when I started shifting the way that I ate. And there are just certain things, right, where you're like, oh, can I have this? Can I not? Right. And the mind again may talk you into like, oh, it's fine this one time, right? Or this is okay. But if you actually listen to the body's energetic, subtle pieces, like that thing will tell you yes or it will tell you no. And so if there was food that, somebody made, but they're like, oh, I don't know what I used. I'd hold a little bit or I'd kind of come near it. And that would be my automatic inclination of like, can I have this or not? And if there was any hesitation in the body at all, that was an automatic no.
Yeah, interesting. I've experienced that a little bit lately, something similar, um, where I get an urge um, to go outside.
Mhm. Yep.
And lately I've been, you know, going outside when I feel that way. And yeah, it's powerful. Your body's telling you like, hey, you need this right now, go.
Yep. Yep. Is there a certain time of day that you're noticing that come more?
Yeah, it's kind of in the later afternoon.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I would just say do a little deep dive into like what those rays are and what they do to your body simply because you'll find that your body will crave certain components of light throughout the day. And something very interesting as you build, I didn't necessarily talk about this in the light series. I might have mentioned it very briefly, but as you build your solar callus, which is basically like your body's ability to take in more and stronger light, that's where a tan comes in. So it's like you can't, I mean, you're not going to get the result. But like if you don't go out at all and then you go out at like 2, 3, 4 o'clock, right? You're not going to get a tan, you're going to get burned because the body needs to start with that morning sun, take that in, move that into the afternoon. There was a month I was living in Mexico a few years ago, and I can only be outside from like 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. because the sun was so strong and hot. But by the time I left, I had the best tan I've ever had. And that was literally the only time I was outside until after 5. But it's that consistency, right? So just, yeah, listen to what your body wants because there's something property wise that it's asking for with that light.
Hmm. Interesting.
See what it is. Typically that like it could be vitamin D, it could be some like just immune support, or I find even like as the sun starts going down now between like 4:35, 6, there's just this certain, that golden hour, there's a certain quality of red in that time that is so healing to the body. Um, but yeah, maybe with like workouts and various aspects, that red light is really what your body's like wanting to absorb more of.
Yeah. I'll explore it
I don't
more
know,
for
just an
sure.
idea. Yeah, but play around with it. Um, so we talked, I want to knock out this next slide for just a quick, right? Yeah, well, just if you're okay hanging on for a couple minutes, I just got 2 more. And then we'll pause at that stuff. Like, and if you guys have to leave, I completely understand. I'm just gonna finish these 2 up. Um, so just even in that holding, right, and that awareness, even in the sway test, right, we're engaging that ventral vagal again by being in relationship with something and we're recognizing what signals the body is sending us. Are we hungry? Are we full? What do we need? Are we thirsty? Right. So all those different aspects we just talked about. We've kind of already talked about this again, just in that last slide. There's a little hyperlink to this quote. But again, this is what we just did. So really just again that how can we engage with the food to trigger that saliva? That saliva we'll find later is going to impact the gastric juices, which is going to help the entire flow of digestion and ultimately allow the nervous system to prepare the stomach to receive food. So just some quick rules again. This is the only stage where food is voluntarily taken into the mouth. So unconscious eating, right, is when you're disengaged from that experience or from the eating experience, excuse me. What does it feel like when you engage with your food, right? So when you guys go to have your next meal, can you actually feel that exteroception? Can you feel yourself co-regulating and in relationship energetically with the thing that you are about to consume? Can you pray over it, right? Can you give it thanks? Can you engage in some type of relational aspect even as you're eating? Um, I made this like incredible uh chicken bone neck bison meat thing for my dog. And literally when I put it in her food now and I mix it all up, she'll sit and she starts drooling. And once she starts drooling, I'm like, all right, you're ready to eat. This is great. But it's just those little things where it's like, oh, she's ready to engage with this, right? So just, being in that relational awareness with what you're eating. Um, Again, that rest and digest, what we talked about, just being in, or, if you want to look at it as, um, I forget the phrase that they use, but, basically the safety and relational piece, right? Safe and social, excuse me. Um, Safe and social is rest and digest. Sometimes we think about rest and digest as like, oh, I'm going to sit with my phone and scroll, right? But as you sit with your phone and scroll, you're not actually necessarily engaged in the eating process because of whatever you may be looking at, maybe you get an email or something and you're engaged in that. What is the emotional experience that you're having in those things as you're digesting that food? Because all of that is going to be digested, right? Even a message that you get, whether it's told to you or you interpret it, right? Again, we talked about thoughts and all those things. Um, Chewing is going to play a big role just because the saliva itself is going to provide a lubrication and assist the food moving through the esophagus. Like I said, it's also going to stimulate some of those gastric juices that will then be needed to actually break that food down and absorb the nutrients, which we'll get into next time. Um, and we'll cover the gastric phase next time. That will be phase 2 of the 3. This is kind of where I thought we were going to stop today. So, any questions about any of that?
I don't think so. That was really good though. I love how every week it connects. Like I don't have to wait until the end of the sessions to like, oh, it all connects. Like it's connecting every week. So
That was my intention and making it
yes.
this way. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan, for putting all this together. It's really helpful, and I'm this is the first one I'm joining live, which has been great. I like the conversation, but I've been watching, following along, the learning labs, and yeah, how it's all tying together, like Katie said, is it's pretty powerful. And
Yeah.
if you actually adopt all of this, into your daily life, it has a massive impact. I can speak from experience, so.
It does. It does. I can speak from experience too. I mean, this stuff without knowing it is what changed my panic attacks and my anxiety and just the way that I look at myself in life and all the things and literally the emphasis of what I teach and practice now. So thank you for reinforcing and confirming that, both of you. Yeah, it was wonderful to have you here. I love when we get people joining. It's fun. Feel free to join us any Tuesday. I'll have recording of this up later today. And then I don't think I have slides from week 4 up either, so I'll add slides for week 4 and week 5 up as well. And then, yeah, if you guys have any questions as you're moving through anything, you know how to find me. Next week, we'll cover the rest of the digestive phases, and then we'll drop into some aspects just around like big agriculture and things of that nature. So,
Exciting.
if you've got questions,
Good.
you know where to find me.
Thank you.
You're
Yep.
welcome. Enjoy
Bye.
the rest of your day.
You too.
All
You
right.
too.